She walked into the British monarchy with a smile that broke the internet, a wedding that redefined tradition, and a narrative that seemed lifted from a modern fairy tale. But less than 2 years later, that same narrative had completely collapsed. What you're about to hear isn't the polished version of events. It's the behind-the-scenes tension that turned the royal love story into one of the most divisive sagas of the century. And it all began with a single social media post that the Queen herself didn't see coming. On January 8, 2020, Harry and Meghan dropped a statement on Instagram announcing they would step back as senior members of the royal family. That moment didn't just shock the public. According to multiple reports, it blindsided the very institution they were meant to serve. Buckingham Palace issued a terse response within hours, saying discussions were at an early stage. But sources close to the family later claimed there had been no meaningful consultation. This wasn't just a family disagreement, it was a constitutional curveball. And the question that instantly erupted around the world was simple: what pushed them to this point? To understand that, you have to rewind to the early days of the marriage. Behind the coordinated photo calls and charitable engagements, there were early warning signs that Meghan's approach to the role was causing friction. Royal correspondents began reporting that Meghan's approach didn't always align with the more measured palace machinery. One early anecdote that circulated involved a disagreement over a tiara fitting before the wedding. The story goes that Meghan had a specific tiara in mind, the Queen's own collection piece, but the request didn't follow established protocol, causing a behind-the-scenes tension that somehow still leaked to the tabloids. A minor incident on its own, but when it became public, it transformed into a symbol of something much larger. Was this a clash of personalities, or was the palace system simply resistant to a confident, independent woman with her own way of doing things? That question still hasn't been settled, and it would only grow louder in the months ahead. But the tiara disagreement was just a tiny tremor compared to the earthquake that was already building inside palace walls. Within months, the coverage turned sharply negative. Stories surfaced about alleged tensions with palace staff, and then just before the couple's departure, a serious accusation landed in the public domain. The Times of London reported that an internal complaint had been filed, alleging Meghan had driven two personal assistants out of the household and undermined the confidence of a third staff member. The report described palace aides who felt bullied, and one senior staff member was said to have been so distressed that they took a prolonged leave. This was not a rumor whispered in a tabloid gossip column. It was a documented claim inside the institution itself. Meghan's legal team and spokespeople categorically denied everything, calling the allegations a calculated smear campaign timed to damage her reputation just as she and Harry were stepping away. Buckingham Palace responded by launching its own investigation, an internal HR review into how complaints were handled. But here's where the story takes a truly strange turn. The review was conducted, conclusions were reportedly reached, yet the findings were never public. They remained locked away, seen by only a handful of senior aides. That locked file is one of the biggest unanswered questions hanging over this entire saga. What does it contain, and whose side does it support? I'll come back to that, because it ties directly into everything that followed. Before the dust from the staff allegations could even begin to settle, the couple dropped the bomb that changed everything: the Sandringham Summit. In the days after that infamous Instagram post, the royal family gathered at Sandringham House for what insiders described as a crisis meeting. The Queen, Prince Charles, Prince William, and Prince Harry sat together to negotiate the terms of the exit. Very few details have ever leaked from that room, but according to Harry's later accounts, it was a tense, emotional confrontation. He has revealed that his brother William screamed at him across the table during the meeting, a raw disclosure that shattered any illusion of calm negotiation. The outcome was absolute. The Queen made it clear. The half-in, half-out model Harry and Meghan had proposed, where they would represent the monarchy part-time while pursuing independent income, was rejected. You were either a working royal or you weren't. The couple would lose their public funding, they would be required to repay the costs of renovating Frogmore Cottage, and crucially, they would no longer be allowed to use the branding Sussex Royal. The Queen's official statement described them as much-loved members of the family, but the line had been firmly drawn in the sand. By March 2020, Harry and Meghan were, in an institutional sense, outsiders. The world was still processing that seismic shift when almost exactly a year later, the couple sat down with Oprah Winfrey for a 2-hour interview that rewired the entire global conversation. It was framed as their truth, unmediated by palace filters, and the revelations came in waves. Meghan described feeling so isolated and unsupported that she experienced thoughts of ending her own life, and she claimed that when she sought help through palace channels, she was told it wouldn't be good for the institution. That disclosure alone transformed the Megxit exit from a headline about protocol into a story about survival. But the moment that genuinely froze global audiences was something else entirely. Meghan revealed that during her pregnancy with Archie, there had been multiple conversations with a senior member of the family about how dark their son's skin might be. She didn't name the individual. Harry later confirmed that the conversation had happened, while also stating clearly that neither the Queen nor Philip were involved. The palace responded with a short, carefully worded statement saying that while some recollections may vary, the family was saddened by the challenges the couple had faced. That line, recollections may vary, instantly became a global talking point. If the family acknowledged the pain, why had no one stepped in earlier? And if memories differed so fundamentally, whose version of events stood closer to the truth? I need you to remember that quote, because nearly 2 years later, an entirely new development would force that exact question back into the headlines in a way nobody could have predicted. I'll get to that in a minute, because at this moment, the story forks into two completely different realities, and which one you believe depends almost entirely on where you stand. In the first version, Meghan is the architect of division, someone who entered an ancient institution, refused to adapt, and when she couldn't reshape it to her liking, publicly shattered relationships and walked away while simultaneously monetizing her royal connection through multi-million-dollar media deals. Critics point to the timing of the Oprah interview, which aired while Prince Philip was in the hospital, as a profound lack of respect. They argue that the pattern of staff accusations, the abrupt departure, and the subsequent interviews and memoir represent a sustained effort to control a narrative at the family's expense. But there is a second version, and it is equally documented. This perspective frames the entire ordeal as a direct consequence of relentless, dehumanizing media persecution that the institution either could not or would not stop. British tabloids published stories that scrutinized Meghan's every gesture, compared her unfavorably to Catherine, Princess of Wales, and on multiple occasions used language that media watchdogs identified as carrying racial undertones. The paparazzi culture became so suffocating that Harry has drawn explicit, painful parallels to the treatment of his mother, Princess Diana. He has stated plainly that he feared history would repeat itself, and that leaving was not rebellion, but protection. This argument gained enormous legal weight when Meghan took on the Mail on Sunday for publishing a private letter she had written to her father and won. The court ruled that the publication was a misuse of her private information, a significant judicial validation that the press had overstepped. It was a public acknowledgement that some of the coverage was not just mean-spirited, but legally invasive. Yet even that legal victory couldn't close the chasm inside the family. In late 2022, Harry and Meghan released a 6-part documentary series that peeled back another layer of their private distress. In it, Harry described the Sandringham meeting again, adding that he was terrified of the moment his brother's team briefed against Meghan, and that the institution's silence felt like a betrayal. The series showed home videos of the couple during their darkest periods, raw and unfiltered. For supporters, it was a brave act of reclaiming their story. For detractors, it was another calculated media product that deepened the division. And then came the memoir. Harry's book laid out intensely personal conflicts in staggering detail, including a 2019 altercation in Nottingham Cottage, in which, according to Harry, William grabbed him by the collar, ripped his necklace, and knocked him to the floor, where he landed on a dog bowl, breaking it and causing injury. The detail was visceral and unprecedented, a brotherly fight, physical and ugly, inside the walls of a royal residence. It was the sort of disclosure that makes reconciliation feel almost impossible, not because people can't forgive, but because the privacy was gone. Every private wound was now public property. Now, while all of this was unfolding, the monarchy itself was changing. The Queen passed away in 2022, and Charles became king. The coronation in 2023 became the next stage on which the fractured dynamic was put on full display. Harry attended alone. Meghan stayed in California. During the ceremony, Harry was seated 3 rows back, separated from his father, his brother, and the rest of the working royals by a visible distance. He left immediately after the service, missing the family balcony appearance and the official portraits. It was a quiet, devastating image of just how far they had grown. The message was clear. He was welcome to attend as a son, but the role he once occupied was gone. Then, in a move that removed any remaining ambiguity, King Charles requested that Harry and Meghan vacate Frogmore Cottage, their only official residence in the United Kingdom. By mid-2023, the keys were handed back, and the couple had no base on British soil. Any lingering physical link to the royal estate was severed. But the biggest unresolved thread, the one I told you to remember, didn't resurface until later that same year. The Oprah interview had left a giant unanswered question. Who in the royal family raised concerns about Archie's skin color? The couple never named the person, and the palace never confirmed anything. Then, in November 2023, a new book by royal author Omid Scobie titled Endgame was released, and its Dutch translation contained a bombshell. Accidentally, the translated edition included names, 2 senior royals, who were allegedly the ones involved in those conversations. The publisher recalled the copies immediately, claiming a translation error, but screenshots had already flooded the internet. The author insisted the names were never in any manuscript he submitted and that it was an inexplicable glitch, but the fallout was immediate. The palace declined to comment, and the 2 individuals were never formally confirmed by any official source, but the damage was done. The question that the Oprah interview had asked was suddenly, albeit unofficially, answered in a way that nobody could control. It reignited the racial dimensions of the conflict and proved that no matter how much time passes, the underlying fracture is nowhere near healed. And that brings me full circle, back to the locked file from the bullying investigation. There are still internal palace documents that remain closed, documents that reportedly contain testimony from multiple staff members, and possibly insights into the very institutional failures that Harry and Meghan have alleged. Until those files see daylight, if they ever do, we are left with 2 entirely parallel versions of history. One version paints a picture of a duchess who clashed with tradition, left a trail of interpersonal wreckage, and used media leverage to reshape her public image at the monarchy's expense. The other version portrays a woman who was targeted, undervalued, and forced out by a system that refused to protect her and then punished her for speaking out. Both narratives rest on real events, real quotes, and genuine pain. The truth likely contains elements of both, but the refusal of any central authority to release the full, unredacted investigation results means the public can only guess. So where does that leave things now, in the summer of 2026? Communication between the Sussexes and the core royal family remains, by all reliable accounts, minimal. Public engagements never overlap. The idea of a warm, united front at any major future event feels increasingly distant. The monarchy has pressed on, focusing on King Charles's reign and Prince William's growing responsibilities. Harry and Meghan continue their work in California, building a life around Archewell and their own vision of service. And the rest of us are left staring at 2 incompatible truths, a hidden HR file and an accidental book leak that may have inadvertently solved one mystery while leaving a dozen others wide open. Because the real story of Meghan Markle and the royal family isn't about who was right. It's about what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, and the system designed to preserve silence finally breaks apart under the weight of its own secrets.